FaZe have been forced to forfeit their opening game of Pro League. Well, I say forced to. According to ESL, they have decided to forfeit their opening game of Pro League against G2 with their new lineup. And obviously, we all wanted to see what the new FaZe would look like, what Twist would look like. But that phrasing, I think it's been pointed out, feels kind of weird, because why would you ever decide to forfeit a game? Well, we'll get into whose fault it is, what the hell is going on here, how the hell has this been allowed to happen, because Pro League obviously wanted FaZe to play, FaZe wanted to play. If you're ESL, you want FaZe's new lineup to debut at your tournament, so everyone wants them to play, and yet somehow it is not going to happen, at least today. And that word, okay, decided to, I don't think you can say decided to in this situation, okay? Basically, what has happened here is that FaZe have not showed up with players or a roster that can play by the rules. So that's not really a decision, right? But the awkward thing is, it doesn't seem like anyone realized this or figured this out until like 4 hours before the game. So they didn't have time to sort anything, right? And we'll get into that, okay? We also do have Twist's partner. I don't know if they're married. They've got the little ring in the bio, so maybe they are. But she's also pointing out, have decided is you know, interesting phrasing. Interesting phrasing. It feels like when you're trying to be super nice to someone and you say something that's like really vague so that you don't offend them. You're like, oh yeah, that's an interesting outfit, you know? Like, you don't want to say that you don't like it. You're just like, let's be vague and just make it seem like it's, you know, whatever. But anyway, let's get into the specifics here, because we've got this HLTV article, which is very helpful. And effectively, they've only showed up with 2 out of 5 players that featured from the Valve rankings that was used as the invites to this event. So they needed to play with 3 out of these 5 players on the left here: Carrigan, Frozen, Simple, Elige, and Rain. And, well, they've only got Carrigan and they've only got Frozen in there, right? They don't have Simple. And that maybe is one of the reasons why they didn't realize this, is because this rankings had Simple in there instead of Brokey. It feels like Brokey's been back for a bit, but Simple was the player in there at the time. And then obviously Elige has been out and Twist has tried to come in for Rain. The confusing thing is there are rules listed for substitutions, right? So I think FaZe at first were thinking, cool, we can make a substitute and that's fine, right? We can show up and we can just substitute Twists in. The problem is you can only make those substitutes if it keeps you with 3 out of 5 players from this original 5-man lineup. And as soon as you substitute Rain out for Twist, that doesn't work, right? That doesn't work. That is essentially what all of this is saying. So I've seen some people say that they think when Rain is there in person, that then Twist can sub in for Rain. No, that doesn't really make sense, because you'd be using a substitute because someone couldn't play. And there's a chance they couldn't play because they couldn't make it to the event. So no, that's not the case. And it seems like I don't think Twist is going to be able to play, basically. It's either going to have to be Rain is going to have to come in instead of Twists, or Simple would have to come in for Brokey. I don't think Elige will be coming in, let's be real, because he's got other stuff to do. Mate, I would love it if Simple came in. But you can see in the rules here, again, that the substitutes thing is listed in the rules, which confused me at first, because I was thinking, especially when you can have up to 5 substitutes, I was like, wait, so what's the problem here? Like, they tried to get the substitute in, but again, even if you can have 5 substitutes, I guess that's just so you can have 1 sub in for every role if you need to, but you still need to keep that 3-man core. So you couldn't use all 5 substitutes, right? And that makes sense. And we can see here with the lineup restrictions, that's exactly what it says. Now, who do we think is to blame for this? That's what you all want to know. That's what you all want to know. Who are we blaming? Okay. And we've had a little bit of tweets coming from Twist partner. And she's basically saying, have decided, I agree is kind of weird phrasing, but we get a bit of a back and forth. And then there was this tweet, which I found interesting, basically saying, oh yeah, well, ESL didn't say anything when the roster was submitted. They booked his flights and his hotel. What if FaZe talked to ESL and they said, all Gucci? What if? What if? And this would have been, oh, I didn't show that tweet. I've just shown myself. I just wanted the full camera. There we go. I've shown it now. You can see it there. And I was thinking, okay, if that's the case, if that is the case, if FaZe had heard from ESL that they would be fine to make this sub, I would actually say, do you know what? Fair play. I can't blame you that much. But for me, I do think that the emphasis to me should more be on FaZe to make sure you are coming to the event with a proper lineup. At the same time, it is in ESL's best interests to try and make sure that all the teams are going to come in and have a lineup that can actually play. But it is kind of your job as a team to make sure you show up with a team that can play, right? Like, it just is. At the end of the day, it just is. And unfortunately, either FaZe weren't aware of that, or maybe they've been misled slightly. We're unsure. We got the more tweets. And again, what if they did and they said it's fine in the past? Just what if? And then I tweeted about this and she replied to me saying she's not suggesting anything. Worst case, it could have been brought up yesterday when Twist was doing his media and SSD setup. So she's not saying that that's what happened. Maybe they'll change and they'll say more about this later. But for now, she's not saying that that is necessarily what happened. But I think until we know the communication between FaZe and ESL, it's kind of hard to know fully who's, like, I guess, to blame here. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to you don't massively, like, put the blame either way. How do I explain this? I think for me, FaZe are the ones who need to make sure they come in with a proper lineup, and they should be looking through the rulebook, right? But if it was kind of implied to them, right, and if there were messages from ESL saying, oh yeah, you can have Twist as a sub, and, like, especially if they said he can sub in for Rain, that's when you have real problems. But I'm going to guess. Here's what I'm going to guess is what happened here, okay? The lineup was listed, and ESL looked at the lineup and they said, that's fine, because you've listed Rain as your active player and Twist as your substitute. And I think what happened is ESL would have said to FaZe, yes, this lineup is fine. That's all good, right? And I think FaZe probably assumed, because it had been known everywhere and announced everywhere, that Twists is replacing Rain. I think that meant they assumed that it was obvious they were trying to sub in Twists for Rain, and that they would be fine, and that ESL knew that. Clearly, that was not the case, right? And I think FaZe are coming in saying, hey, we've got Twist listed as our substitute. It should be obvious. But I do think, like, it's in ESL's best interest to make sure that all the teams have the proper lineup and can play, right? And it would be nice, like, common sense-wise, it feels like you could have maybe messaged and said, hey, by the way, I've seen that you've announced that you are getting Twists in for Rain. Just to be clear, you can't actually sub Twists in for Rain, right? It would have been nice to say that. But I don't think it's on them to do that, right? Even though it would be nice and it would make sense, at the end of the day, if you're a team, you've got to know the rules. You've got to show up and you've got to be 100% aware. And as I was saying earlier, right, especially if you're benching someone that's so beloved like Rain, right? And now you might end up just having to say, oh, Rain, please come back and save our asses. Like, the fans are just going to hate that. They're just not going to love that, right? It's a weird scenario. It's a weird scenario. I can see how the miscommunication could have happened here. This is what I'm guessing has happened. I'm guessing it was the miscommunication between FaZe and ESL, where FaZe list their lineup, they list their sub, and ESL say, yeah, that's fine. And FaZe assume that means, oh, well, we can sub the guy in. And again, yeah, like, in a perfect world, ESL would just be following the news and they'd just say, oh, yeah, by the way, you can't sub him in. But I can't help but feel like if you're FaZe, it is your job to make sure that your lineup can play at the events, right? The other thing I'm wondering is also if maybe people just didn't realize that Simple is the player listed here. Maybe they just actually thought, or maybe people were just assuming that, yeah, it should actually be Brokey in. Because I was looking, who was it on Twitter? It was Massioso who's good at this stuff. I think he basically did the same, where he assumed that it was still Brokey in on this old lineup, right? And so, I can't find the tweet right now, but essentially, when he was talking about this initially, actually thought it was still Brokey in from that old lineup and that it would be fine to sub him in. But obviously, like, again, I'm like, FaZe, you've got to be aware of this, man. You've got to be on top of this, right? Like, if I can just quickly look at this and people in the community can quickly look at this in a few minutes and figure out, like, why you can't play with this player instead of this player, if HLTV can make that article that quickly, surely, I don't know whose job it is, but someone's job it needs to be to say, okay, we cannot play. And again, that's why I'm leaning towards, I think it has to be on FaZe. I think it does. You know, ESL were the ones hosting the tournament. They got other things going on, right? Like, yeah, it's a weird one. It is a weird one. It seems like the conclusion to this is probably just that Rain is going to have to come in and play instead of Twists also, which just puts Rain in a weird spot, man. It makes the whole thing weird. Rain's going to have to come back and be like, well, I know I know you've been benched, and he's a professional. I'm sure he'll come in, and hopefully he takes it as a chance to try and, again, put his name out there, show what he can do. But yeah, it just puts a dampener on the whole thing. And especially, this is the one part that is especially bad from ESL's perspective, is that this kind of messes with the tournament a lot, right? Think about it, right? In a Swiss format like this, now, in your Pro League season, okay, imagine if this happened with like a couple of the top teams and they all got a loss early. Suddenly, it messes up the whole bracket. In this case, it's not too bad because G2 versus FaZe, G2 probably would have been slight favorites. It's not a big deal. But in general, it's a bad precedent to set, man, because you might end up just with some weird results going on and teams ending up in the 1-0 and the 0-1 when they shouldn't, and it just makes the whole thing weird. But yeah, that's that. Weird situation. Hopefully it gets sorted. I guess we won't get to see this roster. It might slow down the potential of this FaZe roster because they're not going to get officials in. It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like it. But again, the one way I would say it is not FaZe's fault is if ESL, if there are words where ESL actively say, yes, you can sub in Twist for Rain, then that's on ESL. But I think, unfortunately, it's going to be ESL saying, yes, you can have Twists as the sub, and FaZe just assuming that means they could sub him in for that player when that wasn't the case. That's probably what's happened here. That would be my guess. Thank you guys for watching. At the end of the day, for me, I feel like FaZe just have to have someone whose job it is as part of their job to make sure the team can get to the events. I'm sorry, right? And for me, it's just such a bad look after you've just benched Rain, who everyone loves so much. And it's not even about benching Rain. It's about the feeling of it happening mid-season, which I think a lot of people are a bit annoyed at, where they're like, okay, it doesn't seem like you have a plan, right? If you're benching in mid-season, that kind of a suggestion that things are just going really badly and you're scrambling to solve it and figure it out, right? So then to have that leading into this, I think, as someone who really likes FaZe, I don't know if I'd say I'm a FaZe fan, but I like these guys. I want to see them be at their best, and it feels like you're just not giving them that opportunity. It doesn't feel like there's that long-term plan being on top of everything, right? But anyway, that's that. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you next time.